Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and welcome all the way from Colorado. Very big time difference. We're recording this in the middle of the day in Melbourne, and coming in from Colorado is Jeni Jonte. How are you? It's like, I think it's about 6:30 something in Colorado.
Yes, it is. And it is cold here. I don't know about you guys, but
Well, we're coming into the last month of spring, so it's sunny. It's probably about 24 degrees Celsius. Colorado is probably coming into winter, so let me guess, close to zero.
probably. So I am not very good at Celsius, but it is, yeah, it's about 35 degrees today.
So not quite yet snow.
It snowed this morning.
It did
So
snow
it
this morning.
got a little warmer. Yeah. hmm
Nice. And are you in the part of Colorado where you've got to have the snow plows that clear the road so you can actually get anywhere?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of snowplows. Although I think they kind of take for granted that the sun is going to come out and try to melt it. So they don't always come around very well, but sometimes they do.
So it's okay if you're working from home, but if you're out having to go out and being a sales rep, for example, on the road, then you almost have to have your own snow plow to get rid of the snow.
There are those days for sure.
Yeah. So
Well,
Jenny,
life is special.
nice. So you're a high performance coach, mindset coach, and prosperity coach. You work a lot with entrepreneurs and sales professionals, and really interestingly, helping them to 10x their business in 6 months. Now, big claim, but love to learn a little bit about your background because you're part of a program that I'm very familiar with in relation to the work of Bob Proctor. And for those of you who are listening to this who don't know of Bob, I highly recommend you look him up. He's since passed, unfortunately, but very wise man, a very successful man, and he's had an impact on, I'd say, millions and millions of people around the world. Jenny, I'd love for you to give us a little bit of your background and what led you to do what you do today, because I know you've got a bit of physical therapy background and some sales. So, before we delve into the topics of today around high performance and thinking into results, love for you to share a little bit about your background and what led you to do what you do today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was sharing with you a little bit earlier, my very first sales job was actually for Kirby vacuums. So going door to door trying to sell vacuums. Needless to say, I did not make a lot of money doing that. And then I also have done lots of various things through the years. I've done Mary Kay and other direct sales and just lots of different ways that I've been in the sales industry. But none of them really like lit me up or got me excited. And so I also, went to undergrad and graduate school and got my doctorate of physical therapy and practiced doing that for 16 years, I think. And this just kind of did sales on the side a little bit here and there. But I always, through that time, I love working with my patients and I love trying to help them, but I felt limited in what I was able to do.
Mhm.
So I felt like I could only take them so far. Like there was further, deeper things that needed to be done that I just working in the medical model, I really wasn't able to address with them. But I also took a long time to figure out what that was exactly. So, I would hear people who were like life coaches or all these things. I'm like, that sounds really interesting and so free that you can just do whatever you want with your clients to try to help them. But I never thought that I could do it. And then, through the years of me working on myself, I came across Bob Proctor and his information. And it was like 13 years of personal growth and development I was doing for myself just all came together. And like all the holes were filled, all the light bulbs went off, and I just knew this is what I needed to do. So I went into that and I wasted no time in delving in as quickly as possible. And with it, I realized just how much, specifically in sales, how many people are really underperforming what they could be doing. So that is one area that I've just come into and seeing that there's huge room for progress there, and people can make leaps and bounds changes just by changing some simple things. That's why I, make the claim of the 10x in 6 months, because the program and what I work with people is a 6 month process, and the changes that you can make in that time truly are really incredible.
Mm,
And this is also important, not just for sales professionals specifically, but entrepreneurs, because as an entrepreneur, that is a huge part of trying to build your business. You have to be able to sell whatever it is that you have. So if you can't get that piece, no matter how much you love your business, it's never going to take off.
mm. Because there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there. They're very good at their product. It's almost like their baby. They've created it from, I guess, an idea, and um, not all of them know how to sell that. Having said that, some of the most successful entrepreneurs that I know, they're very successful at selling. And when they bring somebody in to sell the product so they can
Mhm.
work more on the business, those people that come in don't necessarily have the same results and they can't replicate what the owner or the entrepreneur has been able to do. So, and a lot of that's got to do obviously with the thinking and how they go about it. Because if you ask most of the entrepreneurs, are you a salesperson? The vast majority would say, absolutely not. I'm an entrepreneur. I own the product. I'm the business owner. I'm not a salesperson. So how much of the work that you do, and we'll delve into some of the nuances of thinking to results and how this can help people who are listening to this. How much of it is the mindset or the belief that people have, which probably links to the self-image as to, am I in sales or am I doing something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a huge contributor to it. And so I was saying that was something I had to change for myself, because if I wanted to be able to, you know, get out there, do my own business, start my own coaching, and I had other things too. Before starting this, my husband's also a physical therapist, and we had started our own PT practice for a time as well. And during that time, I had a baby, and things happened, and so we didn't get too far. But that was one thing that helped me back so much, because I just didn't see myself as a salesperson. So trying to market myself, going around to different physicians and groups and all of these places, and trying to, like, because I knew we had a great clinic going. I knew that we could really serve people, but I stopped myself because I had a self-image of, I'm a physical therapist. I'm not a salesperson. I remember when I tried to sell those vacuums, nothing happened. So, and I've had, people in my ear all through my life being like, the sleazy salesperson, and like all these things, these negative things that you say that you just embed deep into your subconscious.
Mm,
And until you start to change that and change your self-image to, yes, a salesperson, but in a positive way, and that you are benefiting and helping people,
mm.
not that you're trying to manipulate them and take advantage of them and you're just all about the money, but you're there to truly serve somebody. And then it's not so negative, and then it's positive, and then you can start to realize that you can have a lot more potential that way.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I work a lot with salespeople who probably don't necessarily have a negative self-image, but they probably focus too much on the selling part, and it comes across more as a convincing strategy rather than a serving strategy. And these are the
Mhm.
ones that often find there's a bit of blockage. They get a bit more resistance, and they almost force themselves to try and overcome that resistance by throwing more information at a potential customer or prospect. And all that does is starts to build up even more resistance. So, if you were then to define going back to the physical therapy days and thinking about, well, I'm
Mhm.
not a salesperson, I'm a physical therapist. How did before you jumped into the thinking to results program and all the methodology behind that, how did you make the leap from being a physical therapist to now engaging clients and bringing them on board, because that is influence, that is selling.
Mhm. So it took a lot of work for me. That was one of the hardest things that I had to do, was working on that self-image. And that is one of the lessons actually in the Thinking into Results program, is trying to decide like what are your goals, what is your vision, what is your dream, and what are you trying to create. So once you have a lot of time that you've spent imagining, like using your imagination and really thinking about what it is that you're trying to do, you say, okay, so who do I have to be for that to come true, right? Who do I have to be for that version of myself for that? So for me, it's a lot of repetition, right? So I had to actually write out like a description of myself, using I am a successful salesperson. I am a confident, I can, use my words to influence others. I serve people. Whatever it is that you
Mm.
are trying to do and try to create for your self-image, that you have to write it out and you got to read it daily. Like read it out loud to yourself, read it in front of a mirror, whatever it is you have to do to just do it repetition and repetition until it starts to sink in and you
Yeah.
see yourself as that.
It's interesting you say that because I work a lot with sales leaders who don't necessarily have a great self-image, or they portray they do, and this is where the imposter syndrome becomes really important. And I was
Mhm.
talking to somebody the other day around imposter syndrome and the fact that all of us to some degree have it, but it's really what do we say to ourselves and how do we think about ourselves moment to moment that often then projects out to, I guess, the external environment as to whether we've got a connection or not. So, would you say through that process you were um, not suffering from imposter syndrome, but yes, there was something you had to really work on because the affirmations is a really important component of that.
Yeah, 100%. And it just took, so, through that time, like still trying to work on reframing my own self-image, I'm still taking action, right? But that's part of it too, right? Like you've got to have your paradigms and your self-image and all those things in place because then the action you're taking is coming from that place instead of where you want it to be, if that makes sense. If you haven't been able to make those changes internally, so then the results that you get might not be what you're looking for.
Mm,
When
yeah.
I was first starting out and I'm taking action, I'm like, I'm going to get into these habits, I'm going to do these things, but I wasn't getting anything back because I hadn't really completed or truly believed in those new paradigms that I was creating.
And that's why, particularly in sales, because you hear a lot of stories about the overnight success or the entrepreneur that struck gold, and went from zero to hero in a short amount of time. And unfortunately, when you look at social media, there's a lot of things on there that talk about, hey, you could be like this, and all you have to do is press this button and you're all good. It takes work, right? And it's an evolution rather than a revolution, but you need to get
Mhm.
feedback. In your particular case, because we'll talk about in terms of surrounding yourself with people, how important was it to have people close to you who gave you feedback, who continued to encourage you, who are able to like be in your corner when things weren't tracking according to you the way you'd hoped?
Oh, incredibly important. And to just have people that are on like the same type of journey that I'm on because again, like I love my family, but they don't necessarily understand what I'm doing. They're like, but why would you change careers? Like, why would you do? You went to school for all those years, had hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loans, and you're changing. I'm like, but I know this is my purpose. So finding other people who are doing the same thing and on the same path so that you can bounce ideas back. I also have a mastermind group that I work with, and that is hugely helpful and important because those days where I'm doubting or I'm not sure or have questions, and then you have people that you can talk with and really work it out.
Because it's the power, you mentioned the power of the mastermind. It goes back to, I mean, Bob Proctor spent probably 50 plus years reading and teaching from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And again, if people are listening to this haven't read that book, it's one of the books you probably have to read multiple times in order to get the gist of it. Because it's not Think and Grow Rich in terms of monetary. It's Think and Grow Rich in terms of your mind and all the things that go with that. So the power of the mastermind is such an incredibly important thing. Love to know from the people you work with, whether it be entrepreneurs or salespeople. There'll be a wide range, I'm gathering, of people in terms of their experience levels and their level of development and where they're at. Um, where do you think one of the biggest challenges sit at the moment with with entrepreneurs and or sales professionals in relation to the doing versus the being, because there's so much
Mhm.
information that's thrown at us, and it's almost like society, whether it be in Australia or whether it be in Canada or the US or UK, there's almost this thinking process that, hey, you can have anything you want. It's just ask for it. It's gonna happen, right? And so it's this instant gratification society that we live in today, that everything's thrown at us and say you can have this now. So we have to have a level of patience. So what are some of the things that you're seeing where people do that want to develop, but they've got this I don't know, this blockage or something that's preventing them, and how hard is it to stay patient when it comes to all this?
I think you hit it right on the head there with patience because I truly believe that it is true. So if you set a goal and whatever you focus on the most all throughout the day, your thoughts become your reality. And that is absolutely true. And we want to set a goal for a time limit, right? But that might not happen in that time limit. And so understanding that just because it didn't happen when you set it doesn't mean that it won't happen.
Yeah.
And still having faith and belief and knowing that if you are persistent and patient, that it will come to fruition. So you don't know exactly how long it will be. Like one of the things that Bob talked about, he had, what year was it? Like 1975, he wrote down a goal that his company would be, worldwide, like operating. He would have a company and it would be operating in all the countries in the world. And it was 2018, I believe, that they finally came and told him, hey, your goal has been met. I just thought you might want to know. So he was patient and knew that if I just keep working and I just keep going, this will happen.
Mm,
But that, persistence and patience. And that is one thing, like you said, and I noticed it too. We also homeschool, and even with the kids, everybody, we don't like repetition. Like we want to be able to do it once and we're done, and it should be good, right? But
yeah.
things you have to have repetition to really make good changes and permanent changes, right? So that's why, like, we make the New Year's resolution or whatever it might be, and you do good for the month of January, and then you're back off of whatever it was because you didn't make it a permanent change in your subconscious mind. So those are two things that we struggle with in my clients too as well.
Well, as you're talking there, I'm reminded of a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago. We were talking to a group of sales leaders at a large, global company, and we were talking about the fact that practice doesn't make perfect, but perfect practice makes permanent. And so it was the art of repetition, but thinking about what are the disciplines that we need to have in place as leaders within this organization. What are the behaviors you want to see play out in the teams of the organization, and how can we build persistence and patience and commonality around that to the point where eventually you'll start to see people developing from, at the moment, maybe some unconscious incompetence to eventually being consciously competent and hopefully unconsciously competent, but doing the right thing. But it takes time. And it's not like, and again, people think, well, just click my fingers or wave the magic wand and everything will be better. No, no. There's a lot of work that we have to do. And most of the work that most of us, when I say most of us, whether it be an entrepreneur, a salesperson, a sales leader, a CEO, um, the biggest work we've got is to work on ourselves.
Yeah, 100%.
And it
Yeah.
starts with the self-image. Now, what I'd love to do is talk a little bit about the actual concept of thinking into results, because you mentioned it before that we become who we think about. So, and it comes from, like, William James years and years ago wrote a book, as a man thinketh, or who was it? It might have been William James, somebody else. Anyway, um,
Oh,
we become who we think about, or as a man thinketh, so is he. Who was it? Oh, there was
oh, that's
somebody.
good.
Who was it?
But I know Thoreau also said, "We become what we think about all day." I think is the quote. I can't remember if that's the right, um, but I
Yeah,
have to.
yeah. William
Yeah,
James pops into my head, but there's somebody else. There's somebody else I know. It's anyway. I'll think about it probably when we finish talking. But the concept of thinking into results, because sometimes when people look at that, they think, oh, all I have to do is think. Going back to the movie The Secret back in 2007, 2008, and one of the things I know Bob was part of that program, but he was very adamant that it's not just thinking, you've got to actually have the thinking combined with action. And I reckon that movie in particular missed the biggest component. It was a great marketing ploy, but you got to do stuff. So let's talk about thinking to results and some of the nuances and the concepts that's going to help salespeople, obviously leaders and entrepreneurs. That yes, you've got to think, but you've also got to do.
Right.
So
Yeah.
let's just talk. Where do you start with somebody? You're working with an entrepreneur or a sales professional, and they're not delivering the results they want. They're not at the stage of their career they want. Where do you start?
Well, actually, like at the foundation of it is being able to set a goal, like a clear goal, a big goal, your like what we call a C type goal. So like you have the goals that you already know how to do, the ones that you've already accomplished, and then like the big thing that you think I could never do. Because if you don't have a clear direction of where you're going, then you're kind of like a hamster spinning on a wheel, right?
Mm,
You're doing things, you're moving, yeah, I want more money or whatever it might be. But if it's not clear why and you have some type of emotion connected to it, then you're not going to necessarily going to make the results that you really desire, right? So you've got to, that's kind of the first step. And then from there, looking at like, okay, what actions am I taking? And we all have this knowing doing gap. Like we mentioned before, you have all this knowledge, all this information. Like our conscious mind is full of so much stuff, right? Like we read and we do all of the things that we've done, but there's a gap in all of this information that we've taken in and that we know, and then the actions that we're taking, right? So trying to close that gap, so there's just so many steps to it. And then there's also, so again, we talked about having to change your self-image, understanding the mind. And so we use a stick person figure. Um, I could draw it for you, but so just to show you kind of how our conscious and subconscious mind work and how that then gets into the vibration, or the law of vibration, which is the fundamental law, the law of attraction, then is a secondary law. I think that's a lot of where that movie and things kind of got it a little mixed up and left people very confused. So just all these different steps that you have to take in order to then be able to realize how your thoughts change the actions that your body takes and then the results that you get. Because what we
mm.
put out is what we're going to get back, if that
Yeah,
makes sense. So,
yeah.
um,
Because
go ahead.
we're always projecting, and often the projections are unconscious, right? So I don't know that anybody that gets up and says, you know what, today I'm going to be as mediocre as I possibly can. I'm going to be really super average, and I'm going to walk into every environment, and I'm just going to show that I just don't want to be there, right? Now, the thing is, you might be thinking that in your head. You couldn't be bothered. It's a Monday morning. It's snowing outside. It's terrible weather. And the last thing I want to be doing is going to talk to that customer, right? Now, if you're thinking that, it will start to project, and sometimes unconsciously, you'll start to behave consistent with that thinking.
Yes, absolutely. And then, I mean, on that note too, so even like if you're meeting with a prospect or something, and inside you're just thinking, I really need to get this sale. I really need to close this person. I really need to, and even if you're not saying that, and you're saying that you really want to serve them, and you're saying that you really care, they can sense it. And maybe they don't know exactly what it is that they're sensing, but they can feel it and they know that something just doesn't feel right and it's probably not going to happen, right? But if you truly put yourself aside and actually just listen and really connect with that person, get emotionally involved in their goal, not just yourself in making the sale, then that is what you're projecting, and it's going to be a much different interaction.
Yeah, I talk about that in sales a lot, that salespeople
Mhm.
need to learn how to remove themselves from the outcome of having to get the sale. And unfortunately, a lot of salespeople have this, and this comes back to your thinking processes and your mindset, that often salespeople think, well, there's only a finite number of customers. And so therefore, when I have a live customer in front of me, I've got to do everything I possibly can to convince them that they need this product. I'm going to try and retrofit. I'm going to be always asking for the close, etc., etc. Versus, you know what? I'm just going to build a connection. If there's something that we have in common, then perhaps a sale will be a natural consequence of that conversation. But if I move into that and say, hey, I don't know whether what I have is going to be of benefit to you, but what I'm here to do is trying to find out. So if I lead with a level of curiosity, then it's a high probability of if there is a need, then they're more likely to lean in and want to know what the solution is to the need or the problem they've got. Versus, and you would have seen this and heard this yourself in sales, instead of coming across with commission breath and saying, I need to go, oh, I'm desperate for sale. I've got my sales manager's chewing my butt. I need to get my numbers in by the end of the week, or else I'm in big trouble.
That's exactly it. But see, now that's a good place where your thinking is going to have a huge impact, right? Because if you're thinking only about like what has happened in the past and where you're at right now, and oh, I need to get this, I need to get this, instead of just looking to the future, thinking of the things that you want and just looking ahead, focusing your attention on that rather than whoever's trying to get you to meet your numbers or whatever it might be. But that's a hard thing to do, right? It's hard to for so many people to push that aside or like to not think about those bills that are coming or to not think about whatever it is and just really focus on where you're going and where you're heading and what that goal is.
So let's Jenny take the pragmatic approach, right? Because there'll be people potentially, well, actually there shouldn't be people listening to this who are struggling because they're listening to the exceptional sales letter podcast, right? Because they're only exceptional. But let's just say, hey, people who listen to this, they think, oh, you know what? I didn't have the month of October that I expected. Um, I do have some things coming. I'm coming into a period now based on my industry where things are slowing down. People are going on holidays. People are less likely to be spending, buying, and all sorts of different reasons. When you have a situation like that, how do you help a person not so much overcome, but deal with it to the point where, okay, this is the current reality. I still have to do things. I still have to have my eye on what the future looks like, right? What is the ideal future state for me? But I need to actually have some steps in place to at least make progress. So how do you help salespeople or entrepreneurs, um, I guess, marry up or manage the the immediate concerns they might have in terms of what reality says, but
Mhm.
also focusing their mindset and all the actions and all the stuff they need to focus on to try and drive positive outcomes in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's where the actions come into place. But I couldn't help but think a quote that Bob would say all the time is that you can create your own economy, right? So no matter what type of sales you are in, no matter what is happening in the industry, you're typically slow times or whatever it is, he always believed that it doesn't matter. You can create your own economy. You can still find the people who need whatever it is that you have. You can still do it. So I find, are very good at making excuses, right? So we're good at saying, oh, it's, December, nobody wants to buy whatever it is in December. Or, we are just good at finding ways to say that it's not going to happen. And I think that that gets into your subconscious more than you believe. And even if you don't realize it, that is now going to affect your actions.
Mm,
So you have this in the back of your mind, like, oh, this is typically slow time of year. And maybe you're not taking the same actions or you don't have the same feelings or vibrations behind what you're doing. And so you're not going to get the results that you want anyway. So that is a part of it. But also just looking at, and we use the example too of like a report card, right? A kid's report card. So we believe that we look at a report card and that tells us what kind of a student we have. But it really doesn't. It really just tells us, oh, that's where your mind was at, like however many weeks ago when you did this test or this time or whatever it is. It has nothing to do with your potential.
mm,
So you can look at your results. You can look at where you're at right now and say, okay, that's where I'm at because whatever, these are the results I got from the actions I took the last few months or something like that. It has nothing to do with what is going to happen next. So now we look at it, we accept it, it is reality, but we're not going to let it affect how we're going to move forward. So it's kind of coming into more of a neutral emotion with some of those things. So now you can just move on to see, okay, so that's what happened then, but now we're going to be here and we're going to move forward to whatever the next step is. If
mm.
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does because as you're talking, I'm thinking there'll be people that look at the next 3 months and they think, oh, the next 3 months is going to be a lot like the last 3 months, and the last 3 months weren't that great. So it
Mhm.
now becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. What we're saying here is to be really conscious of, hey, the reality is reality, but don't make the reality your version of your future. So you can change, and as Bob says, you can create your own economy, which says, okay, if all the evidence is telling me that things are not great, what evidence is there that I can actually grab hold of that I can improve and make and at least make one step forward, two steps forward? How do I create a different paradigm that I can change my thinking and therefore change the actions that I take?
Yep, absolutely. Yes.
So what kind of tangible or specific strategies can we enact? Because I fully appreciate and understand the thinking process, and in fact, the clients that I work with, they don't actually do a lot of thinking, right? So I make it very clear to them that as certainly as leaders, they've got to allocate time per week, minimum half an hour per week to sit and just think. And when I say think about what's happened in the week that's been good things, like what are the wins, what are some of the lessons, and you can start to get some themes. For people listening to this who are in sales, who are entrepreneurs, who are just wanting to improve or wanting to get the next 6 months to look better than the previous 6 months, um,
Mhm.
the Thinking into Results program, what are some key tangible steps that people can think about and take to make progress? Because again, this is not about going from zero to hero. It's about making steps and improvements that will lead to sustainability.
Yes. So, a couple of just basic things that I think everybody can, implement at any time. So, I talked about a little bit of those C type goals, right? So, like, if you have a really big, huge goal, but now break it up into like little destinations, right? And so you can take those. And so we like to do, you write it on a goal card or write it on something, and then carry that with you all the time so that you're constantly reminded of whatever that goal is. You focus on that goal and really, really think about it. Get emotionally involved in the goal because that's another huge part of it too, right? Our subconscious mind is our emotional mind. So we've got to have like good positive emotions associated with that goal that we really want to fulfill. And you also need to write it in the present tense, like it's already happened.
Mhm.
So like I don't know, the goal could be I am so happy and grateful now that I have 5 new clients this month or whatever it is for you. So
Yeah.
that's one thing that you can just start triggering some of these things. But the other one we talked about or mentioned was affirmations, which are really good and really powerful. They just have to be the right one for you. So I know I tried affirmations a lot in the past. Somebody just says, do this affirmation if you want more money, or do this affirmation if you want this or that. And it never did anything for me because it wasn't the right one for me. So I had to figure out, look at what my paradigms were, what things I needed to change, and what affirmations resonated with that and with me. And then those are the ones that I do on a regular basis. And
Mm.
then I start to see results.
Nice. And so, um, and from that affirmation, because a lot of people sometimes the affirmation will be given to them by by their sales manager. You have to make target. You have to sell this stuff. You have to do this, right? So it has to be relevant. Um, and a lot of it then is the self-image you have. How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a successful person? Do you see yourself as a person who's serving hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of people? Or do you see yourself as somebody who's been struggling like you have been in the last 3 to 6 months or the last 12 months, right? So it's very difficult for people because there's so much evidence that might point to I'm not as successful as I'd like to be, and we all suffer to some degree with the comparison game, right? So you look at successful people, quote unquote, on social media, and you think, oh my God, look at them, they're so successful. I wish I could be like that. Versus understanding, you know what, they've got their own stuff they've been dealing with. How about we
Mhm.
focus on what we can do? And as you said, what is the right affirmation? What is the right focus for you? What is the right thought process for you? And then based on that, what are the key actions you can take today to make progress towards that? I'd love you to talk also about the expectations in terms of should we have high expectations or should we remove pressure of having expectations to achieve something, given that we have to be patient?
So two things I want to say about that, and I hope I don't forget the second part. But I wanted to say with that comparison, so that was something that I struggled with a lot as well. Like you look at other people and you're like, oh, it must be nice to have that. Oh, it must be nice to have that. And so for me, I somehow along the line, I just genuinely started to change that to I am so happy. Like I am really happy for them that they are able to go on that special vacation or they're able to buy that house. And I no longer look at them as like, I wish I could do that. It's more like, I love that you can do that. How can I also do that?
Yeah.
Instead of comparing and thinking like, oh, they have it so good. It's so nice for them. That's so wonderful. I could never be like that. Say, no, that's really good. Be very happy for them. Genuinely be happy. But then say, okay, if that's something you want, how can you make that happen too? Because you
Mm.
can. There's nothing different or special about them that you can't also do, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I know I had to work on a lot as well. And it took me, and I can even hear, I hear other people talk and it's like you hear it all the time. I don't know, somebody was talking about a vacation in Hawaii. They were there for an extended period of time. The other person's like, oh, that's nice. It sounds great. And just like, yeah, they're like, yeah, that sounds amazing. I'm so happy for you. Like, it is really good. Um, but yeah, I just had to share that when you're talking about the comparison because it's a huge trap to get into.
Yeah.
But once you realize that you have that potential as well, and if it's something you want,
Yeah.
maybe it looks nice and it's not something that you actually want. But
Yeah.
um, if it is, you can do it. And then I knew I was going to forget. What was the second thing that you
Well, the
said?
second part was I guess the power and or the pressure of expectation. Because I
Yes.
come from I come from various schools of thought and it's changed over time in terms of you can have high expectations, but if you don't fulfill the expectations, that can lead to disappointment. So going into things and saying, okay, this is where I'm heading. How do I focus on making progress towards something rather than having to put pressure on having to achieve that by a certain time? So can you just talk a little bit about expectation and whether we should be having expectation or we should be removing ourselves from the pressure of having an expectation?
Well, I think you should always have some type of, I guess I look at it as standards for yourself. So, like, I know I hold myself to pretty high standards in most things that I do. Like, I don't accept if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do or not whatever it is. So you got to hold yourself to a certain amount of standards, right? I think that's really important, but I think that's more important than the expectation of meeting the goal at a certain time. So if that's what you mean. So like we were talking about before, we set those goals and then we have a time frame because you need to put a time frame on it. It's important to do that.
Yeah.
But you also have to give yourself grace in knowing that if you don't meet it by your time frame, that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. And you need to continue to stay persistent and
Mm,
continue to work and be patient towards it. Just have that belief, keep the belief inside that it will happen, even if it's not on your timeline. So
mm,
I think that's the way to go rather than like setting a hard expectation. You must do this by this time or you have completely failed. Because the only way you fail is if you stop, right? If you
yeah.
give up, if you completely stop what you're doing, then you have failed. But if, as long as you are still working towards whatever it is, you have not failed yet. But I
Mm,
also believe that we shouldn't settle. Like, don't settle. Don't just say, oh, I didn't meet it by this time. I guess it's just never going to happen. And then just settle for this is just where I'm going to be. Because we can always improve. We can always get better, no matter what it is in life.
mm.
We should just be striving to grow and improve all the time, in my opinion. And I'm kind of obsessed with self-improvement. But like, I just think if we're not improving and we're not learning, then I think Bob would also say, if you're not learning, you're dying. So, I mean, what is the fun in that? Like, there's so much to learn in this world, and
Mm.
about you, but I want to learn as much as I possibly can. So, does that answer your question?
Well, I think it does because what I'm thinking, what I'm hearing is you've got to set big expectations for yourself, and you've got to set goals that perhaps because I remember when Bob talked, and I often say this to myself, when you're setting a goal, you've got to set the goal that's so big that when you set it, you've got no idea how you're going to achieve it because it's so far out of your realms of possibility. So it's going to scare the living hell out of you, but at the same time, it's going to excite you with the possibility of what if I got close to that? What if by God, strike of nature or strike of God, I actually end up getting that? What would that mean? So it's not setting easy goals because most, and I see this a lot in selling, a lot of goals people set is last year plus a little bit, right? How about we set last year double? Or as you say, how do we 10x in 6 months? Now, most people's frame of reference will be thinking, well, 10x sounds great if you got zero in the last in the last 6 months. That's not much of an improvement. But if you're thinking, well, you actually had a really great 12 months, and we're saying let's 10x that in the next 6 months, how was that actually physically possible? Which means we have to change our frame of reference. We have to change our paradigm in terms of what we believe is possible. And that's where the goal setting and that's where the expectation comes into it. What I'm saying is don't put too much pressure on yourself having to achieve that because if you don't get to 10x, people might look at that and say, oh, that's a failure. You haven't achieved it. But what have you
That's
actually
right.
achieved?
And you know, that actually made me think of, so I think it's Earl Nightingale that said like a worthy ideal, right? So like setting the goal, you're already successful. So knowing that just the fact that you are working towards this and like, and the success comes in how you're going to grow and change as you're trying to strive for that goal, whatever it is.
Mm,
So it's not necessarily, I think you said before, not like being married to the outcome, like not being totally tied to it. It has to be like this and it has to look exactly like this, or I'm not successful. Like
mm.
just the fact that you set that huge goal, you put it out into the universe, and you are working in a cheerful and calm way to try to get to that goal. That is success. And just seeing the journey and the growth that you're going to go through as a person while you're striving for that big, huge goal.
I think that's the important part because there are sales people that are working for sales leaders who put very big targets, hard targets, and then they measure almost like a micromanager to say, hey, you're behind the target. We're going to have to do a performance improvement plan. And that starts to have an impact on people's thinking as well to say, well, am I worthy? Do I belong? Et cetera, et cetera. So how harder from the people that you're working with, particularly the entrepreneurs and the salespeople, how much of the work is the internal versus the external? And the reason I say that is when you've got people who are working in environments where it's a high pressured sales environment where the scoreboard is telling us whether we're on track or not. And based on what the scoreboard says, sometimes others within the organization will say, hey, Jenny, you're not up to scratch. You're not doing this. How do we continue to actually focus on continual progress and the mindset to the point where this is a path we're on, but at any point in time we could be judged.
Yes. I guess that's where the leaders need to be taking this course, right? Because as we like to say, it's 95% mindset and 5% strategy, right? So it's just so crucial and so important that you are coming from the right place. And then the strategy will just kind of fall into line, right? So it's like being able to do more work with less time, I guess you could say, if you are coming from it the right place, right? And that's really hard to do. Like you said, if you have somebody kind of breathing down your neck and shoving the numbers in your face on a regular basis, and that's just not going to be helpful to anybody. You know where you are.
Mm.
You know if you're not meeting the numbers or not exactly where you want to be. And it's really hard for you to continue to focus on changing the way that you want to if you have somebody doing that. So I guess maybe my goal next will be to try to get to all of the sales leaders out there and just try to help them see another way to go about it. I mean, that's one thing actually the Thinking into Results program has helped um, countless corporations and organizations to increase their revenues by billions of dollars because of just changing some of these basic things that
Mm.
within the companies. So it's been very powerful.
Yeah, and I, I'm curious that your experience dealing with some of these situations, how do you help? the people you work with, how do you help somebody that perhaps is is on the journey, they've embraced the concept, they're working on their self-image, they're putting stuff out there, they're doing the things required, but the results are not coming yet, right? Um,
Mhm.
how do you marry up the reality of what the numbers are saying with, I guess, the promise or the focus on things are going to get better? So how you maintain the faith in continuing on, because I can understand because I've been there myself. The reality was that the numbers just weren't there. I was doing everything, but I just couldn't work out. I wasn't getting the cut through. So how do you help people who are going through that where you've got to keep encouraging them, but also get them to recognize that this is the reality, but they might be getting judged by others, and therefore, how much of an impact is that having on their self-image and the expectations and everything, right?
Yeah. And that's where, like, so in our conscious mind, that's where the thinking comes into play, right? We have the ability to accept or reject whatever comes to us, right? So if you're working really hard on these things for yourself and you can feel the changes and you know that things are changing internally and you feel better, and then you encounter somebody who's like, oh, well, you didn't do whatever it is, or you didn't do that. And you can acknowledge and then reject and not allow that to go into your subconscious mind, right? So it's going to happen, right? I mean, it still happens to me. And that's why even, changing my self-image or changing whatever it is, or as I was starting the business and I get the questions from my husband, like, well, have you had anybody yet? Is it, where's the money? I'm like, it's coming. And I just, I listen, I respond, and then I don't let that go into my subconscious mind. I don't let that affect the new paradigm that I'm building or the new self-image that I'm building. Because yes, those are the realities and they're there. But as we said before, you don't have to become emotionally involved in that. You just see it for what it is, remain neutral to those things that you don't want anymore, and then get emotionally involved in the things that you do want. Because that subconscious, that emotional mind is going to really drive the results that you get. So that is, again, probably one of the hardest. Well, there's a few things that are, but that is probably one of the hardest things, especially if you have somebody like who's above you, who's telling you these things, and you have to answer to them, and you can. And then again, just try not to focus on that as much.
Yeah, because that can sometimes have an impact on your self-image and therefore the actions that you take. Because if you have a person who perhaps is questioning your capability, your desire, that can have a significant impact on your actions and therefore your performance, which can become almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that says, yeah, they were right. I was no good. I'm not in this role. I shouldn't have been in this role. And therefore your self-image starts to um, completely change because of what you're allowing to come into, first of all, your conscious mind, but then your subconscious mind as well. So what we're saying here is it's really important to know what your vision of your future is looking like, whether that be a business target, a sales target, an outcome you're looking for yourself or your family or your business, but then thinking about what are the actions I need to take on a consistent basis. Who do I have to surround myself who will be encouraging me and challenging me and giving feedback? And how do I continue to check in? Am I on track? Is my self-image where it needs to be? Where do I need to improve? What evidence am I seeing that says to me that I'm making progress, even though the results may not necessarily be there yet, but they are coming.
Mhm.
And that takes faith and that takes courage.
Yes, it does. Yeah, because like you said, and that's a whole nother lesson too. It's a terror barrier, right? Because that paradigm is going to tell you like, no, we can't do this. We can't like forget it. Just come back where it's safe. Come back to what we know because
Yeah.
it's just easier, right? It's more comfortable. Then we don't have to think it's hard. We don't have to change things internally. We can just go about our day like we already are.
Mm.
But if you don't break through the terror barrier, then you're not going to get to that next new level. And then, it'll come again. So it's, but that's part of the fun, right? Like doing things that scare us.
Well, it is. It's taking you out of your comfort zone, and that's what I say to clients all the time. If you're doing the same thing over and over again, you'll probably get the same result. but don't
Mhm.
expect the things to be different, because in order to get things different, you have to be different. And in many cases, you've got to start to do things differently. So as we wrap it up, what's some key pieces of advice or some guidance for people listening to this who perhaps are not quite on track yet? Um, it may be a sales leader that's causing them some concern, or they're probably not happy with where they're at right now. What's a couple of things that they you can leave us with that might help them on their journey to improving and moving into what I call exceptional performance?
Yeah. I think one of the first things, like I was saying before, is coming up with a goal, but a goal for yourself, not just what your sales leader or your company wants you to do, but what is your personal goal, right? And maybe it goes beyond even just whatever your, performance for that company is. Maybe it's something even bigger than that. But I think that's one of the biggest things first. And it's interesting too, we go through all these years of school and so many of us come out and we don't know ourselves.
Mm,
We don't we are. We just go through the motions of whatever we're told we're supposed to do next, right? So I would say those two things, just to start out with, is to come up with your own goals, what you truly desire. Like just write it all out. What do you really want? And give yourself permission to like think big, think about things that you never imagined before, but just what do you really, really want? So start doing that and then start thinking, like tap into yourself. Who am I? Like, what do I care about? What do I want to pursue? And I guarantee just thinking of those two things alone will start to bring passion back into whatever it is that you're doing if it's been lost. And then you're going to start to attack it and go at it in a totally different way.
mm. And often when you dial in on that, you can't help but start to become the person who is not so much just worthy of that, but moving in the direction of that. And it changes to, and this is why thinking results is such an important program, because you've got to think first, you've got to set the goal, but then you've got to take the action in order to move to the goal. And as Jim Rohn used to always say, it's not the attainment of the goal that's the most important thing. It's the person you become along the way, to the point where when you do achieve the thing that it is that you've set out to achieve, you're able to handle the responsibility that comes with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. That's another big thing because sometimes the results start coming and your self image hasn't caught up yet.
Yeah,
And you're like, oh, then you freak out. Then it's a whole different type of freak out emotion. So, yeah.
totally, totally. And we see that with people that win lotto and stuff. Their mental capacity to take ownership and the responsibility that comes with that amount of money, they don't necessarily handle it, and all of a sudden it goes. Um, so awesome. So hey, great conversation. Where people wanted to know more about this program and more about you, where's the best place for them to find out a bit more about you and connect?
Yeah, so well, I have a website, Eliminate Impossible, but there's a hyphen in there, so it gets confusing. Eliminate-impossible.com. Or you can just go to Bring On Impossible. Sorry, let me say that again. Bring On Possible, and that will also direct you to the website.
Nice. Impossible.com. Beautiful. Jenny, absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. It's great to see that there are more and more people on the Bob Proctor bandwagon and talking about all the stuff that he talks about. So it's been great having you on the podcast, and all the best in your endeavors in helping salespeople and entrepreneurs 10xing their results in 6 months.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com, and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.